welcome to this evening's panel discussion looking at festivals and events post-COVID. So thank you so much for joining us for the final in this series of online events hosted by Empty Shop CIC as part of Tees Valley Great Place programme. This series is looking at the new normal, was commissioned by Hartlepool Borough Council and Tees Valley Combined Authority, and with some support from the National Lottery Fund, the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England. So a big thank you to all those funders for helping make this possible. So just a couple of tiny bits of housekeeping to start with. If we could ask people to keep their mutes on so we don't get extraneous noise during the discussions. But throughout the panel session, if you'd like to submit questions by using the chat in Zoom, please do, and Empty Shop will help us field those towards the end of the session. But also, if you'd just like to say hello and who you are, and please do feel free to do that again in the chat. If you make it for all panelists and attendees, then everyone will see who you are and that you're here, and that will be excellent. So Creative Social asked me to write an article back in May called The New Normal, looking at what festivals and events might look like during and post-COVID, which was for me a really interesting thing to be able to do. And I think, now it certainly seems like a really good time to revisit some of the questions that came out of that article, particularly given the raft of news we've had over this past week. I think at the time I was writing the article, using research, I suppose I was trying to second guess a little about audience reactions to returning to events, particularly in the aftermath of COVID. And of course, we've seen a great deal more research and testing since then. So I think we have a little more idea of what to expect. And certainly at the time, I had a really strong sense that the situation highlighted the importance of culture and events in people's lives, which in many ways for people like ourselves involved in festivals and events was quite heartwarming. But I'll be very interested to hear the panel's thoughts about whether that does remain the case 6 months on, or has either declined or indeed increased. And quite a significant part of the article that I put together was looking at the festivals and events in the aftermath of previous crises and catastrophes, really to see what answers there might be from those. I was very conscious of the fact that so many of the really big hitting festivals that dominated the UK festival scene, probably from the 50s right the way through to the 80s, they were all founded in the aftermath of the Second World War, which I thought was particularly interesting. So there was one area I was particularly keen to look at, which was what happened in the aftermath of the SARS epidemic in 2002, 2003. Although it's very different in terms of scale and impact to COVID, I think it is the closest thing that we do have by way of comparison. And I was quite keen to look at Hong Kong and Toronto. Fortunately, I knew some people there. And I was really keen to see the role that festivals and events played in their kind of recoveries. So for me, I'm really delighted that we got Bridget MacIntosh with us this evening from Ontario, who was one of the people I spoke to who had experienced that SARS and post-SARS situation firsthand. But I also spoke with some people in Iceland, in particular, about the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008. And I think what particularly struck me about Iceland and Toronto, something that seemed very common to both, was the way that these crises seemed to have actually been a bit of a turning point in their festival and event industries, really, if you like. And it seemed to inspire new events and new partnerships. So really some strength really came out of that adversity. So as I mentioned at the top, I think this is such a good time to be revisiting this question of the impact of COVID on festivals and events now and in the future, with this raft of quite positive news that we've had over the past week. But of course, with that news comes some new issues, some timescales, and some new expectations that we're going to have to grapple with. So without further ado, I'd really like now to introduce our panel. We have Annabelle, we have Bridget, we have Eric, and we have Kate. Hopefully their cameras will come on in just a second. And really what I quite like them to do is just to say a little bit about themselves and their particular background in festivals events. So maybe if we could start with Annabelle.
Curse of the alphabet. Thanks, Paul. It's really lovely to be here tonight. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. My name's Annabelle Turpin. I'm Chief Executive and Artistic Director of ARC in Stockton, which is an arts centre, a charity that uses arts and culture to support its local community. And I also chair the independent task force for creative and visitor economies that exists across the Tees Valley, that's been informing the recovery programme for those sectors in our area. So that's me.
Okay, and yeah, in true alphabetical, if we could follow on with Bridget.
Excellent. Hello, everybody. It's Bridget MacIntosh. I'm here in Toronto, Canada, and thank you so much for welcoming me to this panel. I am a cultural strategist and creative producer. So in essence, I work with municipalities, performing arts companies, and nonprofit organizations on everything from event management to cultural planning, event design, strategic reviews, and strategic planning. I'm particularly interested in the role that art and culture play in public space and how they can build healthy and resilient cities. And prior to all this, I spent many years working with municipalities in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, the City of Toronto, City of Hamilton, City of Mississauga, managing their events office and the delivery of large-scale events such as Nuit Blanche. So very excited again to join this panel.
Okay, and if we could hear from Eric.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Eric Stewart. I run a small, quite bespoke crowd safety management company. I say small in terms of the size of us, but big in terms of the size of the events we do sometimes. The biggest event that we're currently involved in is the Vancouver Pasaki Parade, 800,000 people on that. And this time of year, I would expect to be in Toronto because I'm normally delivering training for the first couple of weeks in Hamilton and Mississauga and downtown. But I'm also the chair of something called the United Kingdom Crowd Management Association, who represent most of the security stewarding companies and those specialist crowd managers and universities that teach crowd management as well. So hopefully I can give you some insights into where we've been during the summer and where we've gone over the last few weeks and hopefully where we're going over the next few months.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. And then Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Harvey. I'm the senior producer for Artichoke. Artichoke exists to create events and performances, installations in public space. We work temporarily in the centre of cities in landscapes with artists to transform those spaces for audiences. And one of our events is the Lumiere Festival in Durham, of which I'm the lead producer.
That's great. So honestly, a fantastic and diverse panel. So really, really looking forward to this. So I think, we have to start with the news of the week. I think have to start sort of thinking a little bit about the vaccine. So, given that recent development and around the rollout of the vaccines, I wonder how this might be affecting your thinking about a return to events in the short and longer term. And I wonder maybe if I may start with Annabelle, just because obviously you represent not just events, but a venue. So this is very, very prescient. So I'd be interested in your thoughts about this this potential game changer.
Yeah, I guess like most of us, I'm probably quite hopeful. I spend a lot of time thinking about getting people into buildings. So that has been challenging in the last few months because of the social distancing guidelines. So yeah, I think we're hopeful, but we've got to be really patient. And, I was talking to someone today about Christmas next year, thinking we might still be doing socially distanced performances next year, because who knows how long it's going to take for that vaccine to roll out and be effective. And whilst there's positive news at the moment, there's likely to be hold-ups. There normally are with things like that. So I think hopeful, but trying to be patient probably sums it up. And I think, yeah, we can't suddenly go back to planning how we used to plan. I think that would be a mistake. We've got to be a bit more realistic and a bit more patient than that.
Yeah. Are you beginning to put some timescales, on performances, or are you still having to just wait and see?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly rescheduling. We do a lot of one-night events at ARC. We are probably moving some of those for the third time now, and we have very patient customers and an exceedingly efficient marketing and box office team. And, we just keep moving them on and on until the point when they can happen, unless they're events that we can obviously convert to being socially distanced. So I think we're going to keep doing that, because to suddenly go, we're not going to do anything until we can have full capacity audiences, frankly feels a bit defeatist, and we are trying to be more positive than that.
Yeah, and kind of building on that video. So, Kate, obviously you've had some pretty spectacular sort of major outdoor gatherings and things, and you've got, as you mentioned, Lumiere, I think October this year. So, have you given any thought really to, whether the news around the vaccine is going to lead to larger numbers, or return to similar numbers for previous events?
So Artichoke was happily not organising an event this year, which as an organisation that works in the public realm and in public space, we're in quite a different place than friends and colleagues who are in buildings and venues. I guess the question is the same as Annabelle, is a question of confidence from the public. And I think that's something that has really been knocked. Everybody's world has been turned upside down. So there's a question around what that means for people and their will and need and want to have live experiences. Operationally, I think it's still too early to say what the advent of a vaccine means. I mean, obviously we scenario plan as producers like mad. I mean, that's kind of what we do. So scenario planning with Eric and his colleagues around how you might move an audience around a city, what might be deemed to be appropriate in terms of facilitating social distance without a vaccine, and how that might be flexed. Should the vaccine be rolled out, what the advice will be around that. I think it's still too early to say, but I think what it has given is a real sense of energy to people already, in terms of okay, so we aren't in a complete lockdown scenario forevermore. The light at the end of the tunnel, which we've just used in our announcement for Lumiere for next year, I think is something that everyone is really looking forward to.
Yeah, so I mean, and Eric, obviously you've been involved with some pretty huge gatherings as well, so and the crowd management industry has really been through it this year. And do you think there are going to be some sort of long-term impacts from COVID, or do you think the vaccine is the magic bullet that means we have huge crowds in fields by Easter?
Yeah, the 2020 Vision Media, who've been so fantastic in looking backwards all year. What I have to say, I mean, I'm the guy who brings all the poop to the party. I'm the safety guy, and I'm the one that tells you what you can't do and why you can't do it. And for the last, how many months, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, I've been on call after call after call with the Events Industry Forum or with outdoor event organisers trying to write guidance to get us back. And it's been a spiral of almost depression as we've realised just how hard or impossible that's going to be. The last week and a half has been fantastic. It's like everybody has got a new breath in them and starting again and thinking, now it is achievable. Now, does that bring us some problems? Yes, it does. I'm never, ever overly optimistic. And I think those people that are talking about big events from April need to read the fine print that says that we probably won't have rolled out even the first wave to the most in need until April, and then got some sort of readings as to how those people are taking those vaccines. And I'm with Annabelle, these things can go wrong very quickly. If we had 2 or 3 deaths of people that had just been vaccinated in the previous couple of weeks, and I can imagine everything just freezing while they try to work out what went wrong. But certainly for the main events festival season, and I'm talking from maybe July onwards, there is a huge amount of optimism. And one of the calls I was on at the beginning of this week was we're bringing somewhere in the region of 650,000 people over 11 nights onto a beach in Southern Europe. And we all sat for the first 2 months talking about that as if it might happen, but probably not. But there's a definite feeling this week that there's no reason why it shouldn't, because it's a little later in the season. Everything's going well. Everything's looking promising. The optimism now is at a level that I have to go back to my old role and say, calm down, everybody. Let's not get carried away. And that's what I'm having to do again. I've been trying to boost people, but I'm actually back to trying to tell everybody just to calm down again. But I feel much more optimistic this week and last week than I have done for months and months.
Yeah, no, I think optimism is the word. I was chatting with a colleague in Australia, and he was saying there's a big blues festival down there that went on sale. And I think they've shifted already about 40,000 tickets. So there's definitely some confidence there. So I might just remind Bridget, I was going to ask you, because I mean, as far as I know, I don't think there was ever any vaccine or anything for SARS, and people return, they returned to events reasonably quickly from what I've seen. But do you think it's going to be different this time around?
I think it'll be different this time around for sure. I mean, earlier when this pandemic first hit, I did a workshop with festival and event organizers at a municipality close to Toronto. And there were many concerns about the liability factor and trying to satisfy like the insurance requirements, because everybody was trying to pivot, reimagine their work, try to take advantage of some funding that our province had made available. And so this time around, news of a vaccine is certainly positive and goes a long way to starting to address some of those concerns that come up from insurance providers. And, at the end of the day, it's been a long few months. So that type of news just fuels creativity, just gives that hope, gives that optimism. But yeah, compared to SARS, it was a very different situation, very much so. There wasn't really that need for that, oh, we have a vaccine, it's going to be great. It was a much different scenario, but this time around it's great news, welcomed news. And I think it will go a long way to giving, like, especially smaller event organizers too, like grassroots who are just trying to do smaller events on a small scale while meeting insurance requirements, just the balm that they need. So very good.
Yeah, one interesting thing I really just read yesterday was that the airline Qantas have basically said that international travellers are going to need proof that they've had a jab before they'll be considered for flying. And interestingly, Ticketmaster have apparently been looking at a way of verifying that you've had a vaccine, although they walked back on that fairly quickly, I think, after a bit of an outcry. But I just wonder, really, from any of you, I suppose Eric might well have a view whether you feel we might be put under some pressure, either by audiences or by insurers or by supporters, to actually have some kind of proof of vaccine for attendees at big events.
Yes, and I suspect that they walked away from that very quickly, having spoken to a few of the promoters of large events that they might be trying to sell tickets for this summer. And that might be one of the reasons why they walked away from that as a concept, because it's not something that the majority of promoters that we're speaking to feel is their responsibility to be an enforcement agency for whether people choose to or don't choose to take the vaccine. It's a really difficult question, and I suspect, as normal with crowds, we'll fall into something like the bell curve of 10, 80, 10, where 10 are absolutely, they want to be at the front of the queue and will be the first to experiment. 80% will just want to see what those first and what the herd, if you like, is doing. And then there'll be a 10% absolute refusal. Now that might be 5-95 or 20-60-20, but that's generally the way we go as a species. We tend to split into those groups of those super keen people that want to, those that never will under any circumstances. But I think certainly from the music, from the promoters, from the event side of things, I don't think any of us want to be the decision maker as to whether or not it's right to say, you cannot go to a music festival, you cannot go to a theatre, you cannot go to the cinema for enjoyment unless you can prove that you've had the vaccine. And I think everybody would be more comfortable if the government were to make that decision for them. But if they don't, we're all going to have to make some really difficult decisions. And there's one other group there when you talked about coming under pressure, and I think it's really significant, and that's the local authorities, because the local authorities at the moment still have that crucial say, that crucial decision making based on, are we comfortable with the arrangements that you've put in place to keep the people safe in your space? And if they're not, and as we know from many, many events during the end of the summer and the autumn, they will just step in with a letter and serve it on you and shut you down with maybe a few hours to go. And if that capability is still there with them by the time we start putting on events again, it will knock the confidence of people who might buy tickets, it will knock the confidence of the promoters, and it will certainly knock the confidence of anybody who's considering insuring events in the first place. So I think we've got multiple threats. I don't think any of them are insurmountable, and the vaccine will help with all of them to some extent. But I don't think we've addressed all of those threats yet.
Yeah, actually, you kind of preempted one of my questions, because I was going to put it to Annabelle, actually, because obviously you're involved in one or two sort of key structural organisations in the northeast. As I say, what one was whether you feel they might have a role or a say in terms of venues and events and vaccine rollout. And I suppose one of my slight fears is whether we perhaps get a little bit caught in the crosshairs, whether they, some local authorities might look to insist on vaccination for example, leisure centres or whatever. So I just wonder from whether you feel what might happen there.
Yeah, I mean, I would hate to become an enforcer. I would hate to have to be the one that asks audiences whether they've had been vaccinated or not. I don't think that's our place. And I'm not a scientist. I'm sure there's people on this call that might be able to answer this, but my understanding is that just because you've been vaccinated and can't, hopefully, means that you can't catch COVID, does not mean that you can't transmit it. So I think we need to be careful not to assume that everyone that's been vaccinated can come in and be safe, because that's not necessarily the case if they can still transmit it to people that perhaps can't have the vaccine for health reasons or other reasons. I think pregnant women have been told not to get it. So we need to be really careful not to get the kind of science mixed up here. And as I say, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not saying that's the case, but we need to really understand it. But yeah, I hope that that's not something that we have to do, because I think it wouldn't be right.
No, I absolutely agree. I just wonder, that obviously, I think back in October there was an arts consultancy, Indigo, who published some quite interesting research. I think they got about 103,000 people asking their attitude about returning to events. So I think we've all hit on this about confidence, and I mean I think at the time there's about 69% of people wouldn't consider booking for events for at least 3 months. So quite a big number really. But I wonder whether any of you feel there's a little bit of a difference now, and whether we perhaps need to slightly change our messaging about what a safe event might be. I don't know, Kate, whether you have any thoughts on that.
My sense is that people are really keen to be doing something that isn't looking at a screen. I mean, you only need to see the queues of people outside Debenhams with their closing down sales. Actually, there is a will to be outside and to be actually interacting with real things. And I think the cultural sector is absolutely something that people want to be able to do in the right environment and in the right way. So I think that rather than there being, I think it's people feeling that this is the next thing that they want to do, and that it's being they're getting something that's an offer that they want to see and that it feels right at the moment. But I mean I really think that the digital overload that has inevitably been the case, and is more so in the winter than was, okay, so everyone was going for culture, everyone suddenly was able to access things online that they weren't able to access perhaps before lockdown. That became something that was, certainly a talking point amongst people who would normally be sitting in a theatre. Then people were able to maybe enjoy other activities outdoors over the summer that they maybe hadn't had the time to do, and now people are back inside again, with worse weather outside, and maybe the appeals of walking or whatever seem nice in May. I think the opportunity to be able to share experiences with people in a safe way outside is absolutely really high up people's agenda.
Yeah, I think there was a lovely expression I came across which was called revenge attending, which is it's like, I never really wanted to go to that art gallery, but now I am. Really, just one last question about the vaccine before I move on. I suppose one area I was suddenly thinking is again, having seen this rattling around about one or two industries, whether there might be a little bit of pressure for, if you like, frontline staff at events, particularly maybe security and ushering staff to actually be vaccinated, or whether that might be a pressure on us as organisations. Again, sorry to come back to you, Eric, but I wonder whether that's something you might have thought about.
No, it's fine, and it reflects exactly what we've been talking about for the last few days, and that's, even if we think we can have a crowd safely at a music concert, and in order to do that, they have to be vaccinated, because we can't really socially distance a front of stage crowd. It's not really going to work particularly well unless you're having some hideous measures to make that happen. But the other aspect of that is the people who will have to come into contact with them physically. So those people that do have to make a search of some kind, and whatever that search is as they come in, be it for weapons or drugs or whatever else it is you're trying to keep out, And then if those people were to misbehave, how do you eject them? That neither of those two things can be done without physical contact. And that physical contact is going to come down to the SIA security response teams and search teams. So virtually every security company I know is working on plans as to just what that looks like. But it almost always looks like keeping pods, if you like, keeping a small family group of security camped together if they're camping and working together as a unit of 6 or 8 or 10, so that if one of them does show symptoms, you lose those 6 or 8 or 10, you don't lose the 100, 200, 250 that you've supplied to that event. The problem then comes with, if you do lose 10, have you got 10 in the background that you can bring in from somewhere? Well, I don't know many promoters in the current environment that are going to want to have 20, 30, 40 spare people sitting around being paid for just in case they might be needed, in case some others go off. The loss of revenue for everybody has been astonishing. So I can't envisage a situation where anybody wants to do that. But there is another element, of course, that a significant number, and we won't know until this all comes back to play. I don't know how many SIA security or regular stewards are now driving lorries for Sainsbury's or stacking shelves at Tesco's or doing one of the many myriad of things they've had to do for the last 9 months to keep a roof over their heads and feed their children. And whether they'll come back to us at the end of all this, I don't know. I'm guessing some will and some won't. But I think something else we've got to think about, especially if everybody pushes their opening or their events towards the end of the summer and we get very heavily stacked from the end of July onwards, we might not have everybody that we need to do everything that we want to do and do it safely.
Yeah, I might well come back to that actually in a minute, Eric. But I would like, if I can just move on now, really, because I'd like to just talk a little bit about the role of events and festivals in economic and community recovery. And again, going back to the conversation I had earlier this year with Bridget about Toronto, and she mentioned an organisation called Toronto 3, which I then did a little bit of kind of looking up on, which was formed to help promote tourism in Toronto after SARS. And it was quite interesting because it brought together leaders from business, arts, entertainment, tourism, restaurants, accommodation, and government. And very much from my reading was credited with helping restore tourism spending to pre-SARS levels, perhaps a little bit quicker than anticipated. So, sorry, rather than hear from me, I just wondered, Bridget, if you might tell us a bit about your experience with Toronto 3.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time with SARS, it was 2003. And back then I was producing the Toronto Fringe Theatre Festival. So, a large event, we had 125 different companies. And, just like COVID, suddenly there's an outbreak. The World Health Organization had placed a warning on the city, and suddenly tourism just stopped in its tracks. And so at the time, a lot of our work was focused on still messaging, talking with all of our stakeholders and all of our companies. And keep in mind, this is pre-Facebook as well. Facebook and social media weren't the same type of entities that they are now. We didn't even have YouTube. So it was very much staying, consistent with our communication to let people know that the show was still going on, and trying to combat a lot of the misinformation that was going out through major networks. I think at the time, the severity of SARS in Toronto, I think was quite exaggerated in terms of the media. A lot of the outbreak was limited to hospitals, and they were horrible on that front. But for the most part, it was still business as usual. Like the Torontonians were still going out, businesses were still open, things were still happening. So at the Fringe, we realized that we needed to find ways to work with our partners in the performing arts industry and the tourism industry to start combating the message and saying, no, we're open for business, come check everything out. And at that time, it was membership-based organizations that really emerged as a way to connect different businesses to one another. So we were members of the Toronto Alliance for the Performing Arts, and along with the Toronto 3, really worked together to build partnerships and come up with packages like hotel, theater packages, opportunities that could be promoted, not necessarily to draw international tourists, because at that point, with the message being already out and with SARS happening, we realized because of the timing, those international tours weren't going to come back right away. So we needed to work together to still promote Toronto as a destination, but try to encourage local citizens to be a tourist in their own town, and to work with all the festivals and events across the city, the Fringe included, to put together these packages that encourage people to come out and check out festivals and realize how important they were to the local economy. So yeah, from that, it was a great boost to tourism Toronto. It set the stage for SARS stock, the Toronto Rocks Rolling Stones concert, which really did put Toronto on the world stage. And there's been many legacy festivals, like the Luminato Festival here in Toronto is a direct legacy of that coming together of different business leaders, government, festivals, to put Toronto on an international stage. So.
Yeah, interesting. So where in the wake, I think their budget was about $12 million. Where was it kind of focused on the events themselves, or was it largely focused on sort of marketing and messaging?
Well, there was a smaller piece of that campaign, and it was called A Time for a Little TO. And so that campaign, which was part of a larger You Belong Here Toronto campaign, was more or less focused on the performing arts industries and partnering them with other businesses to create these packages so that local local citizens would go out and actually explore, that theater show that they wouldn't have checked out before, check out the Carabana Festival, check out the Fringe Festival and other festivals that they not necessarily would have gone to prior to, but now they have this like great package with like a fabulous meal, a fabulous like stay at a hotel, and it was an opportunity to explore Toronto when it needed a little bit of love in a very rough and uncertain time. So.
Yeah. Now, Annabelle, it's interesting that obviously you've got pretty much a foot in both camps, because I think you're on the Tees Valley Enterprise Partnership as well as the Northeast Cultural Partnership. So, I'm guessing some of these things are high on your agenda, and I think there's about £16.5 million from the combined central authority that's being invested in long-term recovery of creative and visitor sectors. So I'm very interested in your thoughts about what's possibly the best way to kind of manage this recovery phase.
It's quite encouraging to hear Bridget's view, actually, because a lot of the things we're doing in the Tees Valley, I think, mirror the things you've talked about as being successful. So that's good news. Yeah, the Tees Valley Combined Authority were very quick off the mark to sign off initially £1 million recovery programme for the visitor economy and cultural sectors. And that's been followed by a sort of longer term 4-year investment strategy just signed off in the last couple of weeks that has that £16.5 million figure attached to it, which is very pleasing. If you work in the cultural sector, that feels like quite a lot of money in the Tees Valley. So I think that the focus to date has very much been on starting to support our events and festival sector to make sure we've got a kind of buoyant calendar next year. Lots around messaging, particularly for hospitality and visitor economy businesses. And actually in talking to some of them recently, they're actually feeling quite positive about customers coming through the door once they're allowed to. And I think that was quite good to hear, actually. I was quite cheered up from talking to some of the local business owners recently. I think what's interesting in this current period where restrictions are coming and going, and I'm sure lots of people have been confused by those restrictions. The focus is always on things you can't do. You can't meet more than 6 people. You can't have alcohol unless you're having a meal with it. And actually what we're interested in doing is spinning that round and telling people what they can do, because certainly at one point when we went into a new set of restrictions, lots of people weren't doing things they were actually able to do because they thought they couldn't. So I think there's something around the messaging that needs to be more enabling rather than restrictive, and that's hopefully something we can do as a kind of sector. So very similar things.
So I was going to say, is that something you feel can be done at a local level, or are we a little bit in hock to national government and the Boris's press conferences?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to try and champion it at local and regional level. Our customers hopefully listen to us and will listen to kind of local messages, perhaps, over and above the kind of the government messages. I think we've just got to do as much as we can. Obviously, through the local enterprise partnership, we do feed these concerns back through to government. But we're not necessarily expecting a massive shift in the messaging nationally. But I do think it's important that as individual businesses and as groups of businesses and as sectors on, as I say, on a local and regional level, that we do, you know, try and channel our messaging to being more coherent and, as I say, more enabling and less restrictive.
Yeah, I found I came to an interesting one the other day, Kate, because I noticed that Artichoke, you're involved in Galway's 2020 European Capital of Culture. And if ever you could have had worse timing for a capital of culture, I can't think of it. So, and it's kind of got me thinking, because I mean, obviously, you know, a big part of being a European capital of culture is about regeneration and you know, all those kind of things. So I don't know, I just wonder if you've had any conversations with them, whether they're going to try and carry some of that momentum over, you know, learn some lessons from it, or whether they're just having to, you know, hold up their hands and say, you know, what a shame.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I think what Galway did at the beginning of the pandemic was to retreat really from the international agenda, and obviously recognizing that international artists and being able to work across borders was going to be really difficult, and to focus the support and therefore the programme that came out of that on locally based or Irish companies. So I think what the pandemic will have done in relation to Galway's arts sector, and therefore kind of what comes out of it in terms of legacy, is capacity built within the organisations locally. So a lot more focus has been placed on their work. So Artichoke has actually been producing the work of Macnus throughout this period. Macnus, the street spectacle company based in Galway, famous for their Halloween parades. They were the recipient of a commission for Galway 2020 to create a production of Gilgamesh. That was meant to be culminating in an indoor show, which obviously, you know, every time you're getting to a point where you think, right, we're doing this, you know, the parameters are changing all the time. But I think what the companies are realizing and recognizing, and I think Ireland has been able to be slightly different in the way that they've classified film and TV as an essential service. So right the way through the most strict lockdown, that's been able to continue. I think the companies have kind of have sort of built on that strength of knowing, well, okay, we are the companies here who can carry that mantle. And I think what will come out of it, hopefully, is a kind of strengthened a set of confidence within that sector, because they have been carrying that mantle themselves. So I think it's been an interesting time. I think the legacy from that Capital of Culture programme was never going to be large infrastructure projects. So it was about capacity and reputational building. So, you know, that can still continue.
Yeah. And actually, Kate, I was just going to ask you one other question, actually. I just remember, interesting, I was working at the Edinburgh Fringe just in the aftermath of the 9/11 attack. What was quite fascinating, it was the festival after that, you know, there was a huge number of performances that were actually focused on that event. Or, I mean, almost in a way as if, you know, they were helping, you know, really helping people come to terms with what had happened and those kind of things. You know, from your kind of connection with artists and producers, do you think that we might be seeing a you know, fairly significant amount of work really trying to put our experience of COVID into some kind of context?
I think there will inevitably be a reflection on people's experience this year. I think that anything that creates a profound sense of us examining our position in the world and our vulnerability within that place that we call our planet is inevitably a real driver for artists. I hope that as things kind of move forward, that we'll be able to use that in a kind of really diverse reflection of the experience, so that rather than it becoming about the pandemic or about what that has not enabled us to do, it's actually what has this taught us and what can we do differently as a result of our experience of having to slow down, of having to look at the world in a different way. So I mean, I think as the longer it goes on, the more it becomes not an immediate reaction to lockdown and to the sense of a global pandemic, but what does that mean for us as humans, and what's our responsibility to look at things differently?
Yep, that's yeah, spot on. Really interesting. Really, just want to just a slight sideways shift, but mean, I think when we think about kind of community recovery, I mean, I have a feeling, and it might be quite interesting, but I have a feeling that a lot of us involved in events might be expected to turn around quite significant events in quite short periods of time, to help, sectors of the economy recover. And I just wonder, obviously that's going to create rather truncated planning times and those kind of things. And just wonder whether we feel a bit uncomfortable about that. I suppose, Eric, you might be at the front line in that sort of situation.
I think, in fairness, that's already happening. The events that are being planned for next summer, who would normally start with a debrief maybe in August, September, have yet to have any form of interaction, or are just starting to have interaction with their local safety advisory groups. And the SAGs that, I nearly said approve, I should slap myself for that, because they don't approve, they've got no authority to approve. The SAGs who sit and help you scrutinise your own safety plans are normally a really fundamental part of the process of sense checking what it is you're doing. And so for the biggest events during the summer months, we are already behind on the timescale. And I was speaking to a couple of the guys and girls on the call yesterday. A lot of them have lost not just the boots on the ground level staff, but some of their senior managers as well. So big festivals that might normally have had 7 senior management working have only been able to afford to keep on 4, and the 3 that have gone now to other work. So you can bring in 3 more people, but how much experience have they got? So it's a double whammy or triple whammy in many ways. We are behind the curve in terms of planning. There will be a massive desire for these events to go on, and probably an awful lot of push. And if we are going to truncate those planning timescales, we are going to need an awful lot of support from the local authorities and the emergency services, at the same time as all of those are feeling pretty bruised and pretty broken because of what they've just come through for the last 9 and 10 months as well. So get hit from all sides, but we can still do that if they will cooperate, and I'm sure they will. The majority will.
Yeah, and Bridget, was that your experience in Toronto after, was there this kind of bit of a surge of events and everyone just had to kind of cope and muddle through?
With SARS, I mean, again, it was still very much, I want to say business as usual, but the events went on as planned. But I think there was much more of that energy of what Toronto could be. And, after going through that much promotion and being on the world stage, so definitely a renewed creativity in terms of like, how can we, contribute to this thriving creative economy? And so definitely many more festivals created and the like. And I think this, now moving forward to COVID times, I think just to continue on what Eric was saying with the demand and that desire now to have live events and to get back to some sense of normal, but recognizing that there's been a lot of damage to the industry, to arts workers, to festival workers. I know there's been many calls here in Canada about a universal basic income for artists. There's been just a recent announcement from the federal government in terms of continued support on that front. So if anything, along with this desire to have festivals and events, to have those happen, I think it really does lend itself to advocating for how important like behind the scenes people are with this industry. Like the art just doesn't happen. There's all of us on this panel who make magic happen behind the scenes. There's thousands of staff behind the scenes who require that support to make these events happen. So I'm hoping that along with these calls and this desire from the public to have events and to go out and to enjoy them, that municipalities, provincial, federal governments will really see what it takes to make those happen and invest accordingly. So for the betterment of our sectors. So.
Yeah, which quite neatly actually leads me on to maybe just a little bit of thinking around, artists and organisations. So, Kate, I was wondering, we've all heard so much about the experiences of artists and practitioners working, in some of the really interesting work they produced during lockdown. So, it would be really interesting to hear the experiences of a producer working in the sector. What your experiences have been over the past few months, and what you think some of the key challenges might be also going forward.
I think it's really interesting sector by sector within the sector, if that makes sense. So I think where I think artists have inevitably retreated to what they can do currently, and I think that has produced a lot of different ways of thinking about digital technology and how digital technology can change the interaction with the audience or even make it possible. I think also there are artists who have had more thinking time imposed upon them, whether that's been thinking time that they've been able to use, or whether it's been thinking time that actually you're just trying to think how to put food on the table and to make sense of a life turned upside down. I think there will be some really interesting connections that will come out of that, because I know that there have been people who've been, you know, either talking to people that they wouldn't normally talk to. You know, the magic of Zoom and the frustration of Zoom does mean that you can bring meetings together between people really quickly and easily, and actually there's been a real will, I think, for people to kind of engage in those conversations. So it'll be really interesting to see what the output of that is. I think sort of echoing Eric's sense of what happens, you know, and what there is. I mean, I think that's a real question, particularly for venues where you're trying to say, okay, we can get back to a venue scenario of being open, but actually what is the product that's available to book, and what is possible if you're trying to, you know, to book a season, or to try and get back to a sense of regular activity and to please that audience that's wanting to see lots of different things. I mean, you know, the status of creation in groups will have made that, I would imagine, really, really difficult. So individual artists who've been able to pursue and to create in different ways are perhaps in a different position from the art forms that rely innately on collaboration.
Yeah, well, one thing that's just flagged up in my mind also, you know, not just performance, but actually it's flagged up a little bit of a question in my mind just about audiences as well. Just, I think all the research I've seen seems to be suggesting that, you know, there's going to be some audiences that are going to be very willing to return pretty much the day we open, you know, and others who are going to take a lot longer. I think there was an American study, and I think basically, you know, about a quarter of the under 35s were happy to go now, but only about 4% of the over 55s were prepared to go for several months. So, and I suppose I'm beginning to wonder if this is going to, you know, start having an impact on the kind of work that artists are going to produce, or you know, maybe from your point of view, Annabelle, the kind of shows that you'll be looking to book over the next year. Is it going to be an issue?
For us, I don't think it will be, because I hope that we were before and still are really relevant to our audiences. So our experience of reopening ARC in September and October is that actually our older people that engage with us actually did come back through the doors. They were desperate to get back. A lot of them are the people that have been sat on their own, very isolated. So whilst they weren't necessarily coming back to watch live shows, they were coming back to take part in creative activities themselves. And that kind of burst of creativity that we've seen in people's own homes is definitely kind of carrying across. So I think for a kind of an art centre that has a very local focus, we're actually in a really positive position, and I'm really confident that we can get our audiences back, audiences in the broadest sense. I think if you're a mid-scale theatre, producing theatre, dependent on a particular demographic, it's going to be a lot tougher. But, you know, I think we have learnt lots of things through this time, and I think change is afoot, and I think that's a good thing. This is an opportunity to change who gets to make work and who gets to see it, and we should absolutely seize that opportunity.
Yeah, and you touched briefly there, obviously on the digital future, as it were. And actually, I think Bridget, I think you're involved in a big digital project over in Canada. So, you know, any thoughts on what's going to continue after COVID?
Well, what's interesting, so the project, Link Digital Futures project, it's done with the Canadian Arts Presenting Association, which is also, for anyone interested in digging into different reports and statistics, great resource for insights on the Canadian performing arts industry. Even before, though, COVID had hit, going back to the question of audience development and how Canadian performing arts organizations and festivals can start to you know, figure out how to plan for audience growth and how to promote themselves. We were looking at linked open data as a means of enabling arts organizations to improve the way they collect data and the way they present themselves online, so that it could be searchable by the myriad of you know, devices, or like the Googles, the Apples, you know, basically the companies that control the internet and how like the search results are created. We wanted to make sure through that project that performing arts organizations and festivals and events coded their websites in such a way that they would be discoverable online. So if we do find ourselves in a situation where our audiences, might choose to continue to consume events online, or, God forbid, something with the COVID vaccine happens and we continue to maybe exist in this hybrid of digital performance and live performance. Okay, we need to go back to digital performance. We want to make sure that organizations promote themselves in such a way that people can find them online and the like. So I think going back to your question about digital futures, I do think it's, no matter what, there will always be a digital component as well to festivals and events. I think it's just will be part of good planning to look at ways that programming can exist in both worlds. And through Link Digital Futures and other projects, we'll continue to work with arts companies on ways to make sure that they're discoverable and they can find their audiences and their audiences can find them based on content, the artist, the genre, etc. So,
yeah, and certainly you're flagging up something I was thinking, which is I think when we look back, as an industry, I think we have become a great deal more kind of tech savvy, and certainly had to sharpen those skills. Just one last question, just I suppose around organisations and artists, really, and this can go to all of you, or maybe certainly Eric might have an opinion. Just it's often the case that when you have some kind of, whether it's a crisis or difficult situation, that it can often end up in changes in regulation. That there might be new rules and those kind of things. So I just wonder if any of you have given that any thought as to whether how likely that might be.
General view at the moment from our side is that if there is going to be any change in rules and regulations, it probably won't be driven by COVID. In terms of our industry, there are other things happening that may change some rules and regulations and laws. I'm not sure that COVID for us is going to change very much that we do, certainly not the steward in security role. It will improve, I hope, our communications and make them more positive, but I'm not sure that there'll be anything government or authority driven that will change what we do or how we do it.
Okay, and what I like now, next little section really is just talk a little bit about, in a way, future partnerships. So going back, it sounds as if I'm on a retainer for Toronto 3 Alliance here. But actually, again, with my conversations with colleagues in Iceland, it seems to come through loud and clear that meaningful collaboration and partnership is the key to a successful outcome from COVID. So I suppose, Annabelle, really taking the example of the Northeast, do you think the partnerships are already in place or do you think we might need a new strategic body to sort of drive a new joined up future?
I think they're already in place. Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in a lot of different networks and partnerships. Each of them have a slightly different focus and purpose, but obviously COVID is something so universal that I think we're all going to be applying ourselves to kind of coming back from it in with those specific different focuses. So yeah, I don't necessarily think we need anything new, and I think we can spend a lot of time working out what the new thing is that we need, when actually we're all eager just to kind of get on with it. And I think certainly in the northeast of England there's a really strong sense of partnership at a sort of local and regional level, and I think that's something positive to build on.
Yeah, and I wonder, Bridget, because obviously they had some success previously, is there any talk at all of getting the band back together, or is that time past?
Not that I have heard, but I think right now, Toronto being in a gray zone or lockdown zone, other pressing, entities at the moment. I know our provincial government has been focused very much on that hyper-local tourism and doing what they can to make those investments so that we don't lose our festival and event organizations, and just making sure that the money is flowing and that the funding is there to make sure they survive. Maybe in a few months, it's something, in the new year. I know the provincial ministry is also releasing a new plan and some new reports to chart their organization forward. So perhaps out of that, there'll be some discussions about, do we have another large concert or the like. but yeah, back to your question with partnerships, and with that, I think at this time too, the relationship with our funders and our funding bodies right now has been so key in terms of exploring how we can fund, or different ways of funding, or breaking apart those models to really identify what is needed from government funding bodies to support festivals and events. So when you talk about partnerships and that need, and what does that look like, there's already great organizations and partnerships that are happening right now in the Ontario and Toronto area to support festivals and events. But now more than ever, I think that conversation with our government partners and finding new ways to fund work and explore that is what seems to be emerging now, and is great. So.
Yeah, I know that the rest of you, but also, I mean, one of my senses is that we have perhaps benefited in the past few months for some cracking research, around all of these areas, really, about recovery and about events and culture and these kind of things. So hopefully that's something that's going to continue. So one area I did want to touch on with you all, though, actually is I suppose about us, as an industry. Again, Eric, and I know that the UK Crowd Management Association have been quite heavily involved in this One Industry, One Voice, which has emerged pretty strong out of this. And again, when I was writing this article back in May, something I remember saying was that as an industry we are going to have to shout loud. So it's great to see One Industry, One Voice getting in there. Do you think it's going to have a post-COVID role, or do you think we need something else?
No, I hope it will. And we've seen nothing yet from One Industry, One Voice compared to what we're going to see. And that's a conscious decision. It was, everybody knew that once we went back into lockdown, we had to really think about what should the One Industry, One Voice group say at a time when you can't do anything and you can't really plan anything because you don't know what's coming from December or the new year. But now the shackles are coming off. I think what you're going to see over the next few weeks, and certainly going into the new year, from One Industry, One Voice. And I know, because the huge amount of work that's been done in the background, how much there is waiting in the wings to be launched. I really hope, and I think if anything good and positive comes out of this, the One Industry, One Voice group stays together, keeps talking. Maybe we don't have to talk every week on Zoom, because I'm losing not the will to live, I'm losing the context of what conversation I've been in. I can't, because I'm not sitting in a room, I can't remember who I've said to what. It's just a screen full of faces in my backdrop. But if we could get One Industry, One Voice and continue to build the relationships between so many different aspects to this industry, then I think there's a real hope that we can make things better going forward. And there's got to be something good come out of this. There normally is. So let's hope it's something, and I don't care what it's called or who its membership is. If everybody can come together and move this forward, then yeah, let's just hope that's the benefit.
Yeah, and you touched on it earlier on, just about, obviously freelancers, certainly people on the technical side have taken an absolute hammering. And as you say, there's a strong possibility that a lot of them have just given up on the industry. So do you think, it's the job of something like One Industry, One Industry, One Voice to try to encourage those people back, or try to promote new investment and support for them?
I think so, yeah, and I hope that will happen. And one of the things that One Industry has spoken about and hasn't been petitioning, because they've made a point that they're not a petitioning party, but we have been reminding a lot of government departments that when they suddenly wanted hospitals built, it was the events industry that they came to. Sad to speak of it, but when they wanted mortuaries built all over the country, it was the events industry they came to. And I sit getting really grumpy watching TV, seeing a whole lot of political commentators talking to government officials saying that the distribution of the COVID vaccine is a logistical nightmare. It's not. It's just logistics. It's what this industry does every single day. And to be honest, on a much, much bigger scale. Give that to the events industry, give it to our creative people, give it to our producers, give it to our security to set it and build it, and our barrier companies and trackway companies. We'll have this sorted out in no time. It's what we do. The first time somebody told me that my job was to sprinkle fairy dust over the crowd, I laughed out loud and then realised that, yeah, that's exactly what we do. The whole of this industry, on a daily basis, sprinkles fairy dust and sends people home happier at the end of the night when they arrived. There's logistics, and we could do that vaccine stuff with relative ease.
You've just put in my mind this vision of like loads of guys wearing all black with mag lights, carrying boxes of vaccine around the country. It would be fantastic.
We prefer to put them in pink because it softens them down a little bit.
Yeah, and so really, and on this point, in some ways, of messaging and advocacy, I wonder, Kate, whether you think artists and producers have managed to get their voice heard, particularly not nationally and locally, and if not, or in future, what more could be done?
I think one of the challenges through this has been the sort of sector support and how that's been rolled out. So, I mean, obviously we have a built arts infrastructure in this country, which is, has been kind of mothballed for all intents and purposes. Yeah, I know there's been a lot of activity still going on, but there's been a lot of support in keeping that status quo ready to reopen. And I think that what needs to be recognised is the people that fall between and that support all of those buildings to happen. They support the venues, they support the ideas, they make the ideas. Without artists, we don't have anything to open the doors to. So I think what's really important moving forwards is investment in ideas and that sense of creativity, and not just the infrastructure that supports it. And however that message can get out there, then we will come back to venues that have got some extraordinary things to share with the public, and spaces that can be really really reimagined through artists and their extraordinary minds.
Yeah, do you think we might need to find a way of kind of using our collective muscle, to put that across?
I think everyone's has been trying to do it, and I think that there has been an absolute understanding that this sector is a very, very multi-layered, both in terms of how it's constructed, and I mean that not in a physical construction sense, but in terms of all of the different veins that run through it and how those veins interconnect. I think that the sense of what artists and freelancers create between them, because actually the idea of the artist is made possible through the technicians and the engineers and the people that bring their heads together to make something happen. I mean, I think anything that we can do collectively to recognize that it is that invisible magic and coming together of all of those people that fill the buildings and fill the spaces. If we were to take all of that away, we would end up with a very beautiful but very empty set of streets and spaces.
And just to add to that really quick, I want just an example here in Canada, and I'm not sure if it was beyond, we had an initiative, the September 29th was a Light Up Live campaign. So venues across Canada were encouraged to light their spaces in red. And that was accompanied by a social media campaign, the Red Alert, to really start to identify like who is in this industry and the variety and breadth of their skills. And it was something to really make that invisible visible through the red lighting, and hopefully that is something that will continue in the future as well as an advocacy point for the sector.
Same in the UK. Sorry.
That came from, I think it was an initiative that started in the UK and then kind of spread out, and I think moments like that are really important and really great. And I participated in the first one in London. I mean, it was an extraordinary, to see everybody who would normally be working in the dark, and there they are, out in the light and populating the bridges and riverside of the Thames. I just think that when we're doing our jobs, we are by our nature kind of invisible, and that's the point. So I suppose there is a sense that bringing some extraordinary things to the public's attention is almost the best way we can show our work, and then we've got a story to talk about. Otherwise you're talking about something not happening, which is really hard for people to imagine.
So I've got just one last question that I want to ask all our panelists, and then it's over to questions. So please do fire some questions in through the chat, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So really my last question to everyone really was, what might you consider are the positives that we can take out of our experiences this year going forward? So that's Annabelle, if we can start with you.
I was ready this time. I knew you'd come to me first. I think there are two things that are probably uppermost in my mind at the moment that I'm taking. One is the fact that COVID has exacerbated inequality, but also made inequality more visible, both kind of society-wide, but also within our sector. And I think it has hopefully reinforced people's determination to kind of change and tackle some of that inequality. And you know, perhaps that during the kind of the closed period, it's allowed some voices to come through that we might not normally hear. And I think certainly we've, you know, our attention has been drawn to independent artists and freelancers and the challenges that they face in managing those careers, and we have to find a better way of supporting that part of the workforce. So I think that's the first thing. That's obviously, you know, kind of very obvious thing. I think the second thing is it's given us permission not to do things. It's given us permission to do things differently, to take risks. You know, there's a certain, I think we're very guilty in particularly in the arts part of the cultural sector of doing things because we think we ought to, or because we've told the funder that we're going to do them, or worse still, because we've always done them. Whenever you hear that thing, oh, we always do it this way. No, we don't. No, we don't. What is the right way to do it now? And I think COVID has shaken up all those things in a really positive way. And I was thinking about this earlier when I first got to ARC and it was really struggling financially and struggling to kind of find its way. I realised looking back what a brilliant opportunity that was, because I could take all the risks in the world, because frankly I couldn't make it much worse. And I think there's a little bit of that being where we are now. It's got so bad that we're freed from some of the constraints. And I was thinking that interestingly, pre-COVID, the word disruption was being used in a positive sense. People were talking about disruptors as being really exciting people that challenge your business and, you know, allow you to innovate and be entrepreneurial. And when you say disruption now, it's kind of, you know, it has different connotations, but I think we should embrace the disruption and see it as being a positive thing, and hopefully, yeah, to tackle some of those inequalities.
Yeah, I'm seeing T-shirts with that slogan on right now, actually. So how about Bridget? What positives can we take from this year?
Definitely echo everything Annabelle has said, but especially even for myself as a creative producer, this time has really slowed everything down. And I feel that for the first time really in my career, myself, and actually there's a group that I'm working with, Art of Festivals. We've gathered other creative producers from across not just Canada, but in Europe as well, small collective. And we're just using this time to reflect, to stop, to evaluate what it is we do and how we do it. And if anything, it's given us the luxury of time to read, to research, to develop our practice, and also just to recognize what we need in terms of self-care and taking care of ourselves as those people behind the scenes that spread the fairy dust and make this magic happen. So I think out of this, a benefit that many organizations will take is that reflection: why we do what we do, how do we do it differently, can we experiment? And I think if we didn't have COVID, we would just keep staying on the hamster wheel and doing what we do, because that's what's expected. So
yep. And how about Eric?
I think if I'm going to take one big thing away from this, other than the things I've already spoken about, it's sitting in virtual rooms with people who would not normally have ever spoken to each other, really serious competitors in the industry fighting for each other's business and prepared to metaphorically cut each other's throats to get there, and sitting joined together to try to come up with mutual solutions that work for us all. Now, there's no guarantee that when the brakes come off, that's not going to disappear. But I've seen people going from growling at each other and arguing, because that's what they've always done, to actually laughing and joking and making friends. And I don't think all of those friendships are going to break. I think there are some big organisers, some big companies, some big promoters, some big security companies who are talking together more closely now than they ever have done. And I think that will be one of the big benefits when this is over.
Yep. And Kate?
I think there's two things for me. One is an echoing Bridget's point about absolutely slowing down and getting off the hamster wheel. And I think what that enables us to do is to look at things in a different way, be it as a producer, be it as an artist. You know, your attention is in a very, very different place, and I think that's something that's really valuable, and trying to find ways when we are back on the hamster wheel, whatever shape that wheel is, of making sure that you don't lose that sense of looking at things. And I think the other thing is just valuing what's important and not taking things for granted. You know, you take things for granted because they're there, and actually making choices about how you spend your time when you are able to make a choice as to how you spend it, and you know, really valuing and taking time to do the things that are important.
Yep, look, thank you all very much for that. So now over to questions. So I've got a first question here. This is from Michael Cohen in Sydney. So Michael's asking, how do we manage free association events that happen in the public domain? He's saying that these are still problematic with restrictions for 100 people max in public spaces. Are there any events that happened in the public domain so far that have managed it well? Okay, anyone like to pile in on that one first?
We ran, I think I can speak about this, I think the organisers would be quite happy. We ran a series of growing events from, I think it was July or August, whenever they actually let us start again, through till just a month or so ago at Santipod, the motorsports raceway in Bedfordshire, Northamptonshire borders. And they are events for people who are car enthusiasts, bring their cars to look at other people's cars, and there's music and there's bars. And we managed to build that up during the period to, I think our max capacity was 6,500. I mean, those events during a normal summer might have anything up to 100,000 in a huge old airfield, but we reached 6,500. Was it done safely? It was done as safely as we could make it, but you're still relying on the public to behave in a sensible manner. And that was our biggest challenge, was once they'd had a couple of beers, would they refrain from interacting with each other, particularly in the campsites during the course of the evening? And our biggest challenge there was to try to explain and work with the local authorities that the old principles we think of a LARP, as low as reasonably practicable, still apply in this COVID dangerous world. We can't zero risk. We can't zero risk anything. And when we did persuade them to apply those principles and bring the risk down to as low as we could, then they let us proceed. And I think we ran 12 or 13 weekends with 3-day or 2-day events each weekend. So quite significant numbers over the course of the 11 or 12 weekends, and absolutely no reports of any COVID illness coming out of that event whatsoever. One of my big fears at the moment is now the new sports ground guidance has come out, limiting numbers to 4,000 or 2,000 or 1,000, is that local authorities will focus that, and that will now become a cap that they won't let anybody go above. And when we first wrote the EIF guidance, it was about risk assessing the venue, the size, the space, and the audience, and their demographic and their behaviour, and then putting in numbers that were appropriate to all those things, rather than putting fixed numbers in there. But now there's a target number, and it may well be that authorities think that that is a limit on which they won't let anybody go above, and that, for me, is quite dangerous. But yeah, there's quite a few events have gone ahead during the course of the summer with far bigger numbers than currently we're talking about.
Yep. So the next question, if I may, I'm guessing, well, actually, I'll mention Annabelle, Kate, and Bridget have something to say on this one. So in the scramble to keep artists in work, we've seen a sudden peak in the number of micro commissions and small fees for work that quite often involves substantial amounts of planning and adaptation to move stuff online or to film it. So they're asking, is there a danger that we'll see the work of artists being permanently devalued in this way? Any take? Oh, Annabelle first?
I think it was the other way, actually. Yeah, I think we've, as I say, I think the precarity, is that the right word? Precarity that artists face in their lives. I think that's been really highlighted. So I think we're valuing their time. There's a real call to pay artists for their expertise, for time in preparing proposals. Certainly that's a shift we're making at ARC. And to be reasonable, we've put some micro commissions out. We've put an amount of money on the table and said to artists, you tell us what you can do with that money. We have no expectations of you know, what you're able to deliver with what we recognise is such a small amount of money. You tell us what's possible, and I hope that's behaviour that's being copied by colleagues across the sector.
Yeah, Kate, how about your thoughts on that?
I think in terms of the micro commissions that have come out, I believe that they've come from a genuine desire from the organisations who are offering those to try and spread the money as far as possible. And it's been, as much as anything, an opportunity to keep things moving, in an opportunity where you can't show things to audiences and necessarily be having any kind of income from that. So it's been a sort of way of trying to spread opportunity to artists. I think in terms of looking at the scale of work to come back to, absolutely, that isn't a way that you know, anybody wants to see work being divided up. You know, we want to create projects that are meaningful and appropriately financed to make sure that artists can do their best work.
Yeah. How about Bridget? I mean, has this been a phenomenon in Canada as well?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, you mentioned, so Annabelle had said that this has brought a lot of issues to the forefront. So right now in Canada, there's a revision of the Copyright Act, and copyright is a huge discussion. And now seeing the implications of not having strong copyright regulation, you can see it's happening right now. What happens when artists potentially don't own their work, or, you know, when you do have stuff that happens online, you know, we as a government, you know, need to put those mechanisms in place to protect that creation and that development. Our Canada Council here, our federal funder, has also invested a great deal of money in digital strategies. So again, it's the conversation is right there in front of us, because COVID has forced all of this work online, and especially with groups like Canadian Live Music Association, you know, trying to make sure that that artists are fairly compensated. I think you even referenced in your article, Paul, about streaming services and how certain musicians they get a pittance for their work when it is presented in a certain way online. So yeah, it's definitely a concern how work is created and compensated for in the digital realm, but COVID has given fuel to that conversation, and it helps make the argument for ensuring that artists are protected, their work is protected, and that they are compensated appropriately. So.
Yeah, no, thanks for reminding me of that actually, I think I did mention in the article just about, you know, someone who had something ridiculous like 12,000 downloads on Spotify and got about £14. You know, and again, maybe the situation with COVID and perhaps a little bit more digital awareness across the industry might need to lead to a little bit of reclaiming, if you like, of you know, people's work, or at least, you know, a more collective approach from the industry to, you know, distributing you know, cultural product digitally, rather than, you know, always just going through the you know, those you know, big platforms. So actually another question here. It's for Kate, but also actually Eric might have a view, because I think you've been involved as well. It's actually directly about Lumiere in Durham, which has just been announced for 2021. So are you thinking about lower caps on numbers?
I think what we're doing at the moment is to look at Lumiere, look at how it's operated in the past, and consider different scenarios based on, you know, where we might be in relation to any of the things we've discussed at the beginning. So, I mean, clearly what we will be looking at in our scenarios is exactly what Eric was talking about in terms of space, flow of people, and what that means. I think it's too early to say yet, you know, where that will lead in terms of, you know, vaccines and what's going to be possible.
Yeah, no, sorry, not wishing to cause any dissent or put you on the spot, but so Eric, if you were asked to advise for Lumiere in October, what would your sort of outline recommendations be on numbers?
My first recommendation would be, look how far we've come in the last 2 weeks, and don't be setting any caps at the moment. There's plenty of time, you know, to start talking about ticket numbers and sale numbers. There's time to do a plan for a 100% audience, or an 80% audience, or a 60% audience, but it's too early. Look, the speed at which we've made progress over the last few days even, and where we think we're going to be by April, you know, unless Kate is under some massive pressure from people to put tickets on sale today, which you could do, you just reduce the initial burst of tickets that you might release. And I can't imagine that being the case, because in this day and age, people know what's going on. So I would say don't rush. My advice would be start planning, but don't rush. I think we'll be in such a different place after Christmas, possibly 2 weeks after Christmas in quite a scary place when we look at some numbers again. And then 4 weeks after that, we'll be relaxed again. So I just don't rush anything. That would be my advice to anybody at the moment, as it is to the clients that we're discussing things with at the moment. Just slow down a little bit.
Yep. And actually, there's a lovely question here. So this certainly resonates with me. Somebody who's worked at the Edinburgh Fringe and might well do with Bridget in Toronto, or I'm sure all of us. So talking from the perspective of someone who used to run a DIY venue, where squeezing as many people as possible into a small sweaty room was the norm and was actually an important part of the space's identity and success. Is there a short to mid-term future for small, as in very small venues? Can they bounce back in a world which is suddenly very pandemic literate? I wonder if anyone else has a view on, is this the end of the small sweaty venue?
I would say, again, in the short term, things are changing, as Eric mentioned, so rapidly. So again, to have caution. I know here in Toronto, like some festivals are looking in the short term of pivoting to having things outside. So, if the venue does have access to either its own outdoor property or nearby public space, again, in the spirit of experimentation and exploring new ways of doing things temporarily, this is the time to try it out and see. And hopefully after that, if we do get back to normal, I miss those sweaty, awesome do-it-yourself venues, and they're a huge part, especially of fringe culture. But I think time will tell. But for now, pivot and explore what we can do in the interim until we can get back to that space.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, again, just thinking about Edinburgh. Some of the unsung heroes of the Edinburgh Fringe are the public safety department, who license all these small sweaty spaces, these kind of things. And I suppose I am beginning to wonder whether they will perhaps be a little bit more cautious, over the coming months. I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't blame them. I don't know, Annabelle, I'm no way calling the Ark a small sweaty venue, quite the reverse. But have you any thoughts on these?
It's interesting. I've been talking to a few people today actually about the kind of the proximity to other audience members and how, our willingness to hug friends and family hopefully will return, and our ability to will return very quickly. But the idea of being squashed in a venue next to a complete stranger really does feel quite alien to me. I don't know how it feels to other people, but so yeah, I hope we can get back to that. I've had many positive experiences in small sweaty venues, and I can't imagine not having them again. So I hope we can get back to that in a safe way. But I guess it just might take a little bit of time to get used to that again.
Yep, and I got another question here, which was just someone saying that talk about some research which was suggesting that people currently are feeling quite benevolent towards the arts, and that around about 15% of people are expecting to contribute more, either through donations or attendance. Is that the sense we're all getting, or do we think that that's rather wishful thinking?
I think the more we say it, the more people might give. So let's all say that people are being really generous, and keep going, everyone. How true it is, I don't know. We've had some great donations from customers over the last few weeks and months, but they're a drop in the ocean compared to the kind of income we would have had, if our program had been up and running. So, but I think it's a really positive message to get out there. Lots of people don't realise that many arts organisations are charities, so that's also something we should be shouting about.
I mean, it's not quite giving, but I wonder if you've had this experience, Annabelle. But a venue, a theatre that I work with, obviously they had to postpone a huge number of shows, and they just wrote to the audience and said that they either had the option of a refund or that their tickets were valid for the new date. And I was really staggered, because I think it's about 85% of their audience were happy to wait till the new date, which often was sort of 10, 12, 14 months in the future. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, similar percentages actually. We've offered everyone the opportunity to have a refund, and we're at pains to say that we will always give people the option to have a refund if a date gets rescheduled, because we're putting new events on sale and people are buying tickets for events next year. So they need the confidence to know that their money's not at risk. But most people in that rescheduling over the last few months have opted to just transfer their tickets across, or in fact to donate their ticket income to ARC, which has also been really lovely.
Yeah, and I mean on that question actually of philanthropy, then obviously in Canada, you know, famous philanthropists. Do you think this is you know, do you think it's going to be a good time to be making requests for support, or do you feel you know, it's the wrong time to be asking for money?
Oh, I think it's always, you know, advocacy should be a constant and just reinforcing like how much the sector contributes. I think like here in Canada, it's like the third largest sector contribution. I usually have the stats at my fingertips, but I don't have them now. But just reinforcing that message that the arts are important, and now not just like art, you know, that can be experienced in a venue, but more so like looking at ways that art can integrate into society and can, you know, benefit and integrate into other sectors, and just reinforcing that message, and that it is a sector that is worthy of investment and needs investment to survive, and how it plays the role it plays in the larger economic and social fabric of the country. So yeah, ask away. I think absolutely, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, that's ask away. That feels a nice moment really to conclude our discussion. That's okay. So really on behalf of myself and Empty Shop and the Tees Valley Great Place, you know, thank you very much everyone for joining us this evening.